What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I've got some quick waiver wire ads for you guys as we get into Week 11 action for fantasy football. I've got a list of standouts from Week 10 and guys that I think can help your lineups moving forward the rest of this fantasy season. So let's not waste any time. Let's hit the intro and get into the waiver pickups. One quick thing here before I get into my first player. If you guys haven't already, make sure you go and hit the subscribe button to my channel. It really helped me out, and we're growing fast here as a channel. I can't wait to see this community continue to flourish here on YouTube. So make sure you guys go do that. And with that being said, my first player here on the waiver wire ads list for Week 11, the quarterbacks, as always, that I start out with is Daniel Jones, the New York Giants QB. Jones led the Giants to an impressive victory in Week 10 against Philly without even throwing for one passing touchdown, and he's simply just getting things done on the ground right now with his legs. He has been a very dynamic runner and a very effective player with the ball in his hands, and Danny Dimes has some really nice upside with guys like Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton on the outside. Sprinkle in some Evan Ingram in there, and you've got yourself a really nice fantasy combo. The Giants are trending up right now in fantasy football, and Daniel Jones is a guy who last year as a rookie was a fantasy monster at times, and a guy moving forward who can be streamed in your lineups for top-level QB play the rest of the season. My only other quarterback on the waiver wire ads list for this week is Tua, and he was on last week's video as well, I believe. He's been very impressive so far in his debut to the NFL, and he has seemingly gotten better every week. In his first game against a very tough defense, the Rams, he struggled a bit and didn't throw a touchdown pass, and we actually saw that same LA unit just shut down Russell Wilson and the Seahawks this week. They are a very, very good team defensively. And since then, Tua has been trending up ever since. Tua and his Dolphins just out-dueled Justin Herbert, who a lot of people deem as a guy who is going to be one of the faces of the league going forward. He has been very impressive in his rookie season so far and been a top fantasy performer at the quarterback position. And Tua just outdid him, and he was able to secure the win on Sunday against the Chargers. I think in the future, Tua is going to be a very, very high-level fantasy producer for the Dolphins and win a lot of games for that team. So a little bit more of a future play. But I think in the moment, Tua has some value as a stream quarterback and a guy you guys can go pick up and start against weaker defenses. He is very smart and able to pick apart teams, and he's actually shown a little bit more willingness to run the ball than we expected. We expected him to hang back and be a pocket passer, but Tua is a guy who has used his legs as well so far in the NFL. Tua also doesn't have much to work with in the skill player department. I think if the Dolphins go out in the future and get him some more weapons, this is a guy who's going to have a really productive career. Right now, obviously, Devontae Parker is very solid, and Preston Williams is injured, but there's a little bit more to be desired there at that position. So I think Tua, he's very talented, he's very intelligent, he can get it done for your teams in a given week, and I think that he deserves streaming level consideration when he has a good matchup. Now into the running back section of the waiver wire ads video. A little bit more exciting players here. Nyheim Hines on Thursday night against the Titans was phenomenal. He absolutely ran wild all over the Titans, and he looks like he's starting to take over that backfield in Indianapolis. I think Jonathan Taylor, slowly by slowly, week by week, he's losing the grasp of that workload. Hines is only owned in 40% of leagues, and he had 115 total yards and 2 total touchdowns against Tennessee, and I think that he's just a very dynamic player. He is able to handle the majority share of those touches in Indy, and he's a guy who is very, very, very capable of putting up elite numbers in all formats. When watching that game, Hines really impressed me. He showed that he has Phillip Rivers' trust, and he is able to make big plays happen. Both of his scores were explosive plays, and the effort that he displayed on his second touchdown was crazy. He barely got in and rolled over the top of a defender, so it was a very impressive outing for Nyheim Hines. I think going forward, especially in PPR leagues, this guy is a must-own. I think that going forward, he is going to be the back to own in Indianapolis, and I think he is overtaking both Wilkins and Taylor for that most valuable fantasy job. J.D. McKissic is another guy who needs to be owned in fantasy leagues, especially PPR scoring formats. He's owned in a bit more fantasy leagues than some of the other guys on this list, but I think that he definitely deserves to be on it because of the production we've been seeing from him lately. J.D. McKissic owned in 62% of fantasy leagues, but this guy has just been racking up receptions for that Washington football team offense. They are awful at wide receiver, below Terry McLaurin on the depth chart. And as a running back, J.D. McKissic basically plays wide receiver for this team. In Week 9, we saw 9 receptions for J.D. McKissic, and this guy is a guy who's lining up wide in the slot, so he's definitely not a guy limited to that backfield work. He is getting moved all over the field and being used as a weapon. Him and Antonio Gibson have high fantasy value moving forward, and this is definitely a guy that you can put in your flex. And then this week, he had 7 receptions again against Detroit. And he's just a very dynamic player, a very versatile piece in that offense. He's a guy that deserves to be rostered in all leagues, especially PPR and deeper standard leagues. Salvon Ahmed is a guy who burst onto the scene this week for the Miami Dolphins and is a guy who really kind of took over that game against the Chargers for the Miami Dolphins. He was a great piece and picked up the slack that the Dolphins and Tua were missing from that injury that they sustained at the running back position to basically everybody on that depth chart. Myles Gaskin, Jordan Howard, Matt Breida, all were out for this game, and Salvon Ahmed was the lead back. He was a bell cow for this team, and he handled the workload excellently. Only owned in 0.4% of ESPN fantasy leagues, but 21 carries for 85 yards and a touchdown, and Salvon Ahmed was a very great play this week. I actually saw a couple guys in a couple leagues go out and stream him, and it paid off really nicely. He showed he can get the work done when he's given it. I don't think this is a long-term play for you guys, but in the meantime, when those other players in the Dolphins' backfield are out with injuries, Salvon Ahmed is a solid option in your lineups. Kalen Ballage is a guy who I had on my list last week, and he built off that performance. He was great again this week and shows that he deserves to be rostered in fantasy football leagues. And while Justin Jackson and Austin Eckler are out of the lineup, Kalen Ballage has been the go-to guy for the Chargers and the guy that they want to get the football to. Only rostered in 25% of fantasy leagues this year, Kalen Ballage had over 20 touches this week and 100 total yards from scrimmage. So another great play in your lineups moving forward. I think we can squeeze one more solid game out of him before Austin Eckler comes back and takes the majority of the carries away. Now into the wide receiver section of this video. Cole Beasley is the guy I was raving about a few weeks ago, and then he had 2 quiet performances, but he absolutely bounced back this week. Only owned in 46% of fantasy leagues, but he had 11 catches for 109 yards and a touchdown. This is clearly a guy Josh Allen trusts, and in a shootout against the Cardinals that was actually won on a ridiculous Hail Mary caught in triple coverage by DeAndre Hopkins, Cole Beasley was a shining star on the other side of the ball for the Bills, and he's a guy that I think is definitely second in the food chain behind Stephon Diggs. John Brown has been solid this year, but not getting the volume Cole Beasley is. In PPR leagues, this guy is gold and needs to be rostered on all teams. Tim Patrick is another guy I've featured on this waiver wire video a few times this season, and he continues to be a solid wide receiver 2 in that Broncos offense. Drew Lock clearly trusts him to a high extent, and he's a guy that definitely deserves targets in that offense, and therefore he deserves to be owned in fantasy leagues. 4 catches, 61 yards, that's 10 whole PPR points right there. That's a very solid stat line for a guy that you'd probably put in your flex, and a guy that you don't really depend on to start too much, but definitely worth the roster, only owned in 15% of leagues, and a guy I think you should go out and get. One of the more exciting breakouts in Week 10 was Michael Pittman, the Colts wide receiver that they selected in the second round, and he's starting to flourish over the last 2 weeks here, getting more and more targets, and I think by far he is the most impressive wideout in that Colts offense. I think T.Y. Hilton is starting to get kind of washed up here. He's always injured. He's very inconsistent at this point in his career and not a guy I like to trust in my lineup, and Michael Pittman is seemingly starting to take that step forward and take over the reins in that Colts offense. 7 catches for 101 yards against Tennessee and barely owned in fantasy leagues at 5%. I think this is a guy who you can stash on your roster, see if he continues to break out and develop further down the stretch of the season, and by the end of the year, he might be a wide receiver 2 or a flex candidate in your lineups. Another guy who flashed his ability this week was Keelan Cole Sr., the Jacksonville Jags wide receiver against Green Bay this week. And Keelan Cole was just flying all over the field. He had a punt return touchdown against the Packers, as well as a reception touchdown and like triple coverage. He's very tall and lanky, he's speedy, and he can do a lot when he is given the chance. Cole definitely hasn't surpassed Chark in that offense. DJ Chark made a handful of plays and actually kind of got robbed of a deep ball touchdown against the Packers because Luton, their quarterback, kind of noodle-armed it into the wind, and the defender was able to catch up because the ball just kind of hung in the air. But Keelan Cole, nonetheless, was very impressive on Sunday afternoon. I think that he is certainly the second option in that offense. Laviska Shenault started out strong this year, but has kind of slid down the totem pole in that offense. I think that with some injuries and whatnot that he's kind of going through right now, something to definitely look at. So Keelan Cole definitely warrants a roster spot in fantasy leagues. I think this is a sneaky stream play on certain weeks, and a guy that can be a wide receiver too at times, and a safe flex play as well. So I'd go pick him up. I'd give him a chance to start if he has a really nice matchup and see what he can do for your teams. This video is actually being recorded early in the Ravens and Patriots game on Sunday Night Football. So Jakobi Meyers has just gotten started, and I'm expecting Baltimore to give him a tough look this week. He was great last week against the Jets, but I'm expecting a little bit of a downtick in his performance this week against that Ravens secondary. I think that he's probably going to see some coverage from Marlon Humphrey. I'm not sure if they're going to shadow, but I think that it'll definitely be a tougher challenge than New York. But nonetheless, Jakobi Meyers is only owned in 22% of leagues still. He is 100%, in my opinion, the top dog in that Pats wide receiving core right now, and the guy that Cam Newton trusts with the football. So with Julian Edelman out and on the injured reserve, with N'Keal Harry being inconsistent as ever and looking like a bust at this point in his career, Jakobi Meyers is the guy to go to in that Pats offense, and I think that he's the guy that connects with Cam Newton the most over the rest of the season. My final waiver wire pickup for Week 11 is Logan Thomas, the Washington football team tight end. And when you want to talk about fantasy guys at the tight end position to stream, there is no one better or more consistent than Logan Thomas, who is so sparingly owned in fantasy leagues that puts up the numbers he does. Logan Thomas only rostered in 18.9% of leagues and has 8 or more half PPR fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 performances. So a guy who is very consistent, can go out and get you those numbers you're looking for on a single week, and then can be dropped back down to the waivers or hung on to on the bottom of your roster if you're in a deeper league. I think this guy has a lot of potential. He's got really nice size and speed. He's been around in the NFL for a while. You can see he's almost 30 years old, but a guy who I think in fantasy for 2020, while Washington doesn't really have an elite talent at that position, is a guy that Alex Smith especially trusts the rest of the year. Those were my waiver wire pickups for Week 11 fantasy football action. As always, if you guys have any questions, make sure to put those down in the comment section below, and I'll try my best to get to each and every single one of you guys. I really enjoy having you guys stick around here on the channel, so make sure you guys have gone down and subscribed if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.